Hello, this is Chris Cooper, and a big welcome to the Business Elevation Show. It's great to be back with you again for yet another week. We're now on episode 637. This show has been recording now for 15 years, coming up fairly soon. It's one of the longest running business shows in the world, podcasts in the world. And what we really focus on in this show is bringing you guests who are doing good out there in the world, people who really care. Often either come from a corporate space or an entrepreneurial space or a not-for-profit, and they're now doing things to really improve the world in this challenging time that we live in, where there's a lot of polarization that's going on. What I really care about is just reminding you and sharing with you people are out there who are doing good things and who really care and are really trying to respond positively to the situation that's going on across the globe. And I think this is what I was really surprised after, thinking about all the years that I've been interviewing guests on my show, is how many people out there are doing amazing work, but we don't hear about them. We just hear those big headlines of what's happening. And Carson Kelly, my guest today, is somebody who really does care. We're going to talk about the return on investment of care. We're going to talk about building compassionate organisations that really flourish. On my show last week, we had Andy Lapata, and Andy is a real master around networking. In fact, the last time I had Andy on the show, we also had, I think, Dr. Ivan Meisner on the show as well, from the founder of BNI. And as a consequence of that, Andy and Ivan actually built a podcast themselves. That was a lovely partnership that came out of that particular interview. So Andy talked about elevating your relationships and shared 7 stages of relationship and something called the 4 I's, and really helped us. How do we classify the connections that we want to approach and build relationships with, depending upon what good we're trying to do out there in the world? And it was a really interesting model that we could utilize with our LinkedIn contacts or connections to really help us focus on moving forward with those relationships that we really need to work for us. So let's talk about Carson Kelly, and let's talk about today's conversation. What if compassion wasn't just a moral ideal, but a measurable driver of performance, innovation, and long-term success? In today's fast-moving and often high-pressure world, many organizations still operate from models built on stress and scarcity. They leave people disengaged and depleted. I would say the same thing with politics. I just wonder why we don't focus on things like happiness, like they do in Bhutan with our populations, and compassion. Yet a growing body of science points to a different path. It points to one where care and trust and psychological safety are just central to not only contribute to happiness in the world and connectivity, but to sustainable high performance. My guest today is an organisational strategist. Carson Kelly is the founder of Compassion 2, and we're going to talk about the return on investment of care. And this is a concept that is really close to his heart. He really cares about people flourishing in organisations and human well-being being at the central heart of how we operate. He also draws on neuroscience and lots of real-world experience. He's worked with many amazing companies and had really significant roles in his career. So let's talk today, let's move from fear-based extractive environments to how we make them more generative, more human-centered. We're in this age of AI at the moment as well, where our most human qualities may actually become our greatest advantage. So I'd like to introduce you today to my guest, to Carson Kelly.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
You're very welcome, man. And so am I. Let's start at the beginning. I always like to find out a bit about the lives of my guests growing up, because we have so many fabulous people on this show, and actually, people start from all sorts of different backgrounds and beginnings, and just really interested. Tell us a little bit about your early life and what shaped those formative years for you.
Yeah, fair. So I grew up in Northern California and in Marin County, a little town called Kentfield, and then moved to Dallas with my mom after my parents divorced, and lived there for a number of years, moving back to Northern California when I was in 8th grade, and remained there for high school and then went to college. Moving from Texas back to California was a bit of a culture shock at the time. They're very, very different places in many ways. Texas, in particular, thinks about itself as its own country, really, and I get it, and I understand why. There's a certain spirit there. But coming to California, and particularly Northern California, there was a different level of sophistication in many ways. When I was very young, or I'm sorry, when I was in high school, rather, towards the end of my time, I went on a river rafting trip. And I would say that this story is really the most formative thing because I was headed down this path at the time where I thought I was either going to become a music concert promoter like Bill Graham back in the day, Northern California rock promoter, pushed out a lot of the very famous 60s and 70s bands. So I thought I was going to go that direction, or I was going to go into the direction of becoming a film producer. So when I was as a senior, I had set up this course to go down to University of Southern California and be a part of the film school and go down to LA and do that whole sort of thing. Well, between the point that I made that decision and actually arriving at USC, I had, while still in high school, went out on a river rafting trip and had an experience where I was taken down, which should have been a class 4 rapid, which in the world of river rafting, the rapid classes go from 1 to 5, and 5 being extraordinarily difficult and 1 being, very, very mellow. Anyway, went with a commercial guide group and had with my girlfriend at the time and her parents, and I hadn't been on a river rafting trip before. And they had decided that they wanted to begin their vacation after they completed with us. We were the only commercial people on the trip. And so they decided to start their vacation early, and they took us down to class 5 rapid, which, was insane, quite frankly. And so went down this rapid, the boat turned over, everyone else in the boat got out immediately, but I was pushed into this particular class 5 rapid and had a very difficult time, to the point where some could say I had what's called an NDE, a near-death experience. And when that happened, during the core moment of that unfolding, as you can imagine, my entire world shifted. So by the time I exited the rapid and ultimately got out, I had a complete awareness shift, to say the least, a very, very deep awakening in the sense of really questioning all of the assumptions and my motivations that I had had up to that point. It wasn't about, in the Marin culture at the time, it was, get a Jaguar, get a Rolex, and, do all of the materialistic things. And I was, clearly headed down that path thinking that was the way to go. But by the time I got out of that rapid when I was 17 years old, there was no way I could do that. So once that was done, school was done, I wound up getting down to University of California. And at that point, I continued to study Taoism and some other what I call spiritual 101 materials that had been introduced to me synchronistically enough by an incredible teacher, Mr. Ahern, when I was a second semester senior English teacher. And he really provided a pathway for me to really start to explore alternative ways of looking at the world. And so by the time I got to USC, I switched my major and started studying Chinese and started studying Eastern philosophy and took a job at a New Age bookstore. So that was the thing that set me on a different path.
Wow, that was a really significant moment for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, tremendous. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was at that point in time, I was really faced with questions in philosophy, there's a term I'm sure many of your listeners know. It's called ontology,
Yes.
as opposed to, say, epistemology or ethics or logic. There's these different flavors within philosophy broadly. But ontology is the study of being. It's those kinds of questions. What is the nature of existence? What is the nature of being human? The big questions. And so I found myself really grappling with that because in the rapid, I was really forced to confront that directly. And as a result, I've found myself now on this path now for well over 35 years. Oof, my goodness. Studying this material, studying ontology specifically, but particularly interested in questions of agency and authenticity. Namely, within a system, say, I don't know, like a Nietzschean framework of how you see the world or a Buddhist framework of how you see the world or what have you, what is the framework? And then within that, what does a person do in terms of choice to generate an authentic or how to say, a more, I don't want to say real, but just a different sort of non-asleep sort of experience in life. So I've been grappling and looking at different systems, all kinds of Eastern systems, Western systems, Rosicrucianism, Hermeticism, alchemy, and so forth. And then Western, I wound up moving from Eastern philosophy into Western philosophy, took a degree in that. And I had studied contemporary German and French philosophy, specifically Hegel, Nietzsche, Heidegger, and Foucault. So anyway, I've dabbled in all of these different systems, but it's been central to my life.
And I'll come back a little bit in a moment. But you just before the interview, you shared. I asked you what was new for you, and you've just come back from India, haven't you? And you met His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I believe.
Yeah, I
What
did.
did you learn on that trip?
Well, I learned actually quite a bit. So, as I mentioned, my wife teaches at a private school located at an intentional yogic community that's been here in Northern California for 50 years. They have a K through 12 school there in an intentional community, about 100 people, conference center. It's quite large, quite complex. But every year she takes her 12th grade class, which is basically secular ethics and philosophy class, and takes them to India. And the class has been invited by His Holiness on 5 different occasions to his private residence to talk to him about secular ethics and so forth. And as part of that trip, those trips that are taken, the class doesn't see him every year, but the class goes to various orphanages, talks to other NGO leaders, and interviews people, and so on. So in 2019, I had the opportunity to travel with the class where I met His Holiness for the first time in one of these settings where we were there and engaged, and there was maybe 20 people in the room totally. And it was amazing. And I was, very much in the background. I was just, holding a microphone so that the kids, of course, could engage and so on. But out of nowhere at that point, he teased me for looking old, which was lovely. It was amazing. After getting married and having 3 children at home and catching the children and so forth, that was definitely, top experience, was to be teased by the Dalai Lama. It was just for a moment, but regardless, it was an amazing experience. And then, COVID happened, and the trip stopped for a while. But this past trip, we had an opportunity to receive a blessing. So it was a different environment because he's elderly now. He's 90, and of course, a 90-year-old human doesn't, energy, and when you have hundreds of people wanting your attention all the time. So anyway, we had the great good fortune to receive a blessing, which was just a beautiful few moments together, and he gives a blessing, but it was very powerful.
Amazing.
And yeah, anyway, so there was a number of different events on the India trip this year that were really very significant and amazing.
Yeah, I bet there's a very special kind of aura in that room around him.
It really is. The first time when I had the opportunity to be there in 2019, when he enters the room, the atmosphere changes. And I don't mean that, of course, it doesn't start raining inside or something silly like that, but just the whole space just transforms. And then he leaves, and that leaves too. So it's really quite something. He's an incredible, incredible human being.
I once interviewed the head of the whirling dervishes in
Oh,
Konya
hmm
in Turkey, and I sat in
hmm
a room with him, and he didn't speak English. We were waiting for an interpreter, and he said, "We, while we wait, we speak with our hearts." And we sat there, and the energy that just filled the room
mm
between us was incredible. It was
Yeah, it's
really,
beautiful.
it was just beautiful. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then the interpreter came, and then we had our conversation. But it was,
hmm
yeah, that's a near. I can't quite talk about
It's
an experience like
similar,
the
a
Dalai
very
Lama, but
similar
it
sort
was
of vibe.
something.
Yeah, absolutely. Those more realized beings have been able to activate the various in my opinion, various neurobiological capacities that are inherent to every one of us. They just have not just, but they have taken the mastery and the discipline to do that. And you feel it. And of course, some of the current sciences are starting to demonstrate
Yeah.
what's going on there.
Excellent. So getting a little sense of you, and clearly that the moment that you came out of that raft, and it was really transformative for you. But you had a career in publishing and technology, and as well.
Yeah.
How tell us how that path kind of unfolded and
Sure.
how it led to the work that you do today.
Sure. Yeah. So as I mentioned, when I went down to USC as a freshman in college, I took a position at a New Age bookstore, very famous New Age bookstore. And I think they call them esoteric stores in your neck of the woods or something along those lines. Um, and so I had spent some time down in LA for the first year and realized very quickly I didn't want to study Chinese philosophical inquiry or spiritual inquiry in an academic institution. It didn't align for my purposes. It was much more a personal endeavor. So I transitioned into Western philosophy, and at the time, USC was very expensive. So I made my way into the University of California, Santa Cruz, which is a lot less expensive, and also near the, closer to the ocean and so forth. And I took another position at another New Age bookstore there and continued my book retailing while I was studying philosophy. So I had this opportunity to be around all of these people coming into the store looking for various things to support their own spiritual or health inquiry while I was a student. And at that point in time, I thought I was going to become a philosophy professor. But I had yet another experience where I realized, no, I don't really want to do this as a professional focused thing. It's not really my desire. So what do I do? And at that point, I was recruited to work in a book publishing company in the area on the sales and marketing side that published a lot of the materials that our stores, the stores that I worked in, were selling. So it was a new age book publisher. So I did that for some time. And then right around the same time was the dot-com explosion that happened here in Northern California in 1998, 1999. And I jumped into a high-tech startup actually that had been incubated at this yogic community of all places by some really amazing young guys. They had figured out some e-commerce stuff that they were doing. And so I joined them, and we ran that, bringing 150,000 merchants online to sell through the brand new sales channel of eBay, which had 200 people working for the company at that moment. And then this other weird company called Amazon, and they had their something else in terms of e-commerce opportunities. So we did that for years. Made it through the dot-com crash, bootstrapped the company basically, and pivoted even when all of our services were being offered for free by bigger competitors, including eBay. Made it through for a while, and then everything just changed pretty significantly. And at which point I jumped into enterprise software sales, selling big, large systems, starting with book distributors, because I had all this experience in relationships with various publishers and book distributors. And so we set up a few book distributors, and then we moved into the wine industry. And we're selling big ERP systems to wine distributors all over the United States, which was fun. So I got to meet some amazing people and learn some things about wine. I know a tiny bit, but all of the serious cork dorks that they call themselves, I got to meet in my little business world. So I did that for a number of years, and then the 2019 opportunity happened, and I was able to travel and meet His Holiness, go to India for the first time. And when I came back, I realized that I no longer wanted to be entirely focused in the world of just selling ERP systems to wine distributors, which was fun, and it was a good life in many ways. But I wanted to do something larger. Trump had been elected and in office for a couple of years prior. Not a fan per se, and we were concerned about the growing division at the time. And a dear friend of mine and I decided to found a company called Benevolently. And he had just been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's at 53 years old after having been one of the most formidable social entrepreneurs and venture capitalists that I knew of at the time. I mean, he was in the room when the B Corp language was written. He was one of the first venture capitalists to be about people, profit, and planet, and set up 2 of Paul Newman's summer camps, created the first organic beer company in the United States, and just a tremendous individual. Anyway, so we'd always wanted to do a project together, and we decided to do that. And Benevolently was designed to be a platform for acts of altruism, the goal of which is to create practices of compassion and to ultimately try to have platforms to generate the common good in a sense of other, in a sense of not division, but being able to be connected. And so we had started that process. He unfortunately immediately had to pull out due to his health considerations and then ultimately passed away. But I kept at it, and we had set up some pilots. We had one that we were just getting started with at LinkedIn, and one that was probably going to happen at Google. And then COVID happened. And so we had to put the entire platform and everything kind of back in the garage, so to speak. We had to turn it all off. But up to that point, one of the things that our business model said was that we were deploying these platforms inside walled garden experiences and enterprises. It wasn't an open platform. For privacy and security and safety concerns, everybody had to be known within the system. So people who worked at the organization, along with their friends and family members, as well as vetted third-party nonprofits doing service in the community, would be able to participate in like a mutual care and aid sort of platform, bringing simple benefit, things like just give up 1% of your waking time to another person and give without expectation of return. So that translates to about an hour a week or so. And the idea is that you would just help however you could. So depending on your geolocation movements or what you were up to, you might be able to swing by and, next couple of weeks, take the trash cans off the street and put them back into the, by the side of the house because the person inside had a broken hip and wasn't able to move. Or you could also do something where you might be tutoring or just very simple things, but enough to get people into a pro-social orientation. And as part of that, we designed the platform to not drive any sort of self-interest as much as we were able. So that included no gamification. We weren't interested in driving dopamine addictive loops around gamification for rewards for helping people. No coupons for helping people. No, like you do this and do it 5 times and you get $10 off your next, bag of coffee or whatever. That just, all of that was off the table. So we were trying to build a platform and a user experience that allowed people to lean into the oxytocin and serotonin and other neurobiological cocktail elements that get created when you help another person. So half of that was or not half, but a lot of it involved educating people like, hey, this is what's happening. This is the theory as to why we do these things. And at the same time, to give them a sense of when it happens, try to feel it, try to really orient yourself to actually feeling that experience, because that's the reward. So we were working with a number of amazing people, and one of which was a woman named Dr. Tanya Singer, who's just a brilliant neuroscientist in Germany now at the Berlin, I'm not sure of the language here, but she is at Max Planck Society, and they have different houses, I believe. I think that's what they call them. Anyway, she's the one in Berlin now, but she had done some pioneering research just way ahead of her time on the neuroscience behind empathy and compassion and where that exists in the network areas of the brain, because they're different things and they exist in different places. So she had been kind enough to be one of our advisors to help us to think through some of these things with Benevolently. But when COVID happened and we put Benevolently away, she had invited me to participate with her to support, how to say this, she was an advisor, but she had some friends that wanted to bring together a company to bring her work, the basis of her work, I should say, to a larger commercial audience. And she would help and support by advising the company to do so. And so I did that for about 2 years. And as a result, we built a company called Humanize, and we were bringing Dr. Singer's dyadic practice, which is a 15-minute intersubjective out loud mindfulness practice that was the basis of her groundbreaking research, to a larger public audience. And that was the intent of what we were up to.
Excellent. And you have something you created now called Compassion 2.0. What's that?
Yep. So after I left the company, Humanize, the work based on Dr. Singer's work, I set up something called Compassion 2.0, which is designed to scale compassion and to do so in a way that it develops compassionate human experience in its architecture that are based on scientifically validated or informed practices and products and procedures, interventions, et cetera, that are delivered through our construct of flourishing. And we do so by supporting people who are developing product to do those, to drive that, as well as organizations that want to redesign their organization to drive that with people
Right, I
inside
see.
the organization.
Yeah. So you talk about we've just got 3 minutes till the end of
Hmm.
this section, but you talk about the return on investment of care. So tell us why you use why you use that term and
Sure.
what the
I
return
would,
on investment is.
sure. So ROI of care is the idea that when there's a lot to unpack here, but I'll try to do it relatively quickly. That within the human nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, we have two primary states. We have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest, and we have the sympathetic nervous system, which is tied to the amygdala and fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses. And when a human is under threat, they're looking and assessing for threat, how to protect themselves. When they're in the normal state of parasympathetic in the rest and digest, they're relaxed and they're concerned about the totality of people in their life, be it their tribe or what have you. And they activate higher cortical function. They activate higher capacities in the brain around ideation and complex problem solving and empathy and so on. And those things, when activated, particularly in the age of AI, when those things are activated, those are the things that drive value for an organization. That's where the brilliance lives, and that's where organizations will do well. And so, ROI of care is our work to identify those when those things are in place and tie them to the financial benefits of an organization, which exists today. It's just not really called out and managed and thought about for a variety of different reasons.
So this is why when organisations have really great cultures where people feel really engaged, excited, and energized, and their personal values also align with a company. You're getting these chemical changes inside a human being, which actually what they do is they drive greater results because get excited about the company and the products and the people
Yeah,
within it
and
and
they
that energy.
absolutely, and they trust essentially. It goes to
Yes,
another level, but be underneath culture. But yes, when they feel safe, they're committed.
fantastic. Well,
Yeah,
on that note, we're going to go to commercial break now.
very good.
I've taken some really interesting things from this conversation. I think I like that this idea of the neuro work and the science behind some of this, because we know it happens when people are energized and motivated. They get the results. They get results too. Everybody wins. So I don't.
Absolutely.
So I think there is definitely, having been around culture for a lot of years, there's definitely a return on investment for care. So we'll unpack some of that more after the break. We're back again with you. Some of the practical things you can do, whatever your situation is, whether you're running an entrepreneurial business, you're part of a larger organization, you're setting something up. Some practical steps that we can begin to ensure that we create, a compassion and flourishing around our work that we do. So we're back again with you in just a couple of minutes. Hi, Chris Cooper. I'm with Carson Kelly. We're talking about the return on investment of care and building compassion into organisations. And we know it's when organisations have compassion, they flourish. People don't feel restricted. They don't feel that they're put into silos. People connect and embrace and things move forward positively. So I think what we're talking about here, Carson, is about moving away from fear-based extractive environments. There's a lot of fear around the globe at the moment going on. We need to do our bit, I think, to move to more generative care-based ones. Can you talk a little bit about what that shift actually means?
Sure. And I'll just unpack kind of the difference between extraction versus generative orientation, and not to be confused with regeneration, but generative orientation. And it really gets back to the neuroscience of it all. So when someone is under threat, whatever they perceive as threat, again, our metaphor, at least at Compassion 2.0, is that the sympathetic nervous system fires up and threat-based responses come into play. Again, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And so where our metaphor comes in is we call that, when people have a certain resonance, right? So we want to increase people's resonance as part of a flourishing construct. And resonance is in relationship to self, and so individual resonance is in relationship to self and relationship to other, broadly speaking. What are those resonances? Like you were talking about with the Sufi master, you were with other and the resonance was very high. No words, just heartfelt resonance. So when you're in a threat state and the sympathetic nervous system is responding, you defend, you become protective, you shut down, you get fearful, and all of your energy, not all, but most of your cognitive focus is on identifying the threat that's going to harm you and how are you going to respond. So your trust goes through the floor immediately. I need to protect myself. Can I trust them? So on. So in an organizational environment, of course, it's the same sort of thing, right? They're going to take my ideas? Can I share? Am I going to get laid off? What's happening? And your sphere of concern just becomes yourself. And what happens in the world right now is that to your point, there's so much threat that's being driven, perceived threat in terms of the VUCA, the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, the ambiguity of wars, of pandemics, of inflationary pressures. I mean, there's a lot. And then when people go into an organization, there's even more threat perception, I should say. There's more perceived threat because the organizations are so very extractive in the sense that everyone is oriented towards driving towards financial performance, mostly through organizational performance. Not, of course, that's needed. There's no question that we have to do that. We have to be in business and in economic relationship with one another by all means. However, it becomes a question of how much is too much? How much do we really need to be constantly engaged in this manner? Because what's happening more and more is that the extractive forces are putting people into their sympathetic nervous systems more and more and for greater durations. And as I understand it, I'm not a scientist, but from what I have understood is that the sympathetic nervous system, you basically, it fires up and is supposed to shut down pretty quickly because you are largely in your parasympathetic nervous system in rest and digest as a natural state, and you're with your group, however big that group might be. Some say it's 150 people, some say it's 400 people, whatever, but there's some amount of number of people where you feel safe and you know people and you're just hanging out and things are good. But when the tiger came running across the field at you, then the sympathetic nervous system would fire up and you'd respond and run up the tree or do whatever you did. And then the tiger would go away and eventually it would mellow out. In today's world, particularly in today's modern organizational frames, the sympathetic nervous system is constantly active. And as a result, it's draining on people. It's difficult to be thinking about your work that you're supposed to be generating new value while at the same time trying to mitigate the perceived threats that you're facing constantly. The brain isn't designed to do that, from what I understand. It's designed to either respond or to be generative in the in the parasympathetic nervous system. So in an extractive environment, of which the world and organizations are driving, people are getting burned out, essentially. But in a flourishing idea or a compassionate organization, and I mean that very clearly, I don't mean necessarily compassion in the sense of like, let's hold hands and run through the meadow together, which is a beautiful thing to do. I mean compassion in the sense of care. So the ability for the organizations to create the environment for the parasympathetic nervous system state to be present and then ultimately to scale across all of the people that are involved. And when that happens, that is a generative orientation towards the people who are working in the organization as opposed to an extractive one. So it's fundamentally different, but the results are also very different too.
Yes. You and I both mentioned that we'd both like to go to Bhutan.
Yeah, I would love to go to Bhutan.
And they aren't really measuring things like GDP or
Right.
GNP. They are gross domestic products. They are focusing on happiness
Yeah.
as a key measure.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
is that something that organizations and possibly even countries should start to learn?
Oh, I think that's yes, absolutely. It's a very good example. Happiness, particularly as I understand it in a Tibetan Buddhist or Bhutanese Buddhist context, is to drive, in my language, it is to drive these parasympathetic nervous system states. And from what I understand, in Buddhism in particular, it's to lessen the grasping of the mind onto our identity.
Yeah.
And by driving happiness and by bringing, particularly in the principle of the bodhisattva or developing something called bodhicitta, in terms of orienting towards bringing benefit towards others as opposed to focusing on oneself, you focus on the benefit for others, you can focus on driving happiness. Now, this is my interpretation. I'm not entirely sure if this would align with what the folks are doing in Bhutan, but it's brilliant what they're doing. They're also using stable coins, or I'm sorry, crypto or blockchain rather, to be able to facilitate this at a countrywide scale. I don't know some of the details that they're doing, but it's absolutely brilliant. But to the larger point, what you're implying, organizations can learn from that because it's not so much when you say the word happiness, when one says the word happiness, it can be interpreted as a state of being of relative ease and so forth. But I think happiness, at least in my interpretation, and I would assume what's happening in the state of Bhutan as well, is something more fundamental than that. It's deeper than that. Happiness becomes a result, but it's not the thing in and of itself because happiness is temporary.
Yeah.
It comes and goes because life can be challenging, and that's just how it is. But by focusing on that as a North Star, then everything else lines up to be able to try to create those states for people.
Yeah. So, are there any practical steps people can take to bring more compassion into their organizations or into their networks?
Sure. I would say that at the end of the day, I think it was John Lennon that said, peace needs to start with yourself. And I think that there's a similar sort of orientation. Generative framing ultimately does need to start with oneself in the sense of showing up and being able to how to say operate in the world from a place where, and this is the hard thing, where there's first self-compassion, and then with that in place at some level, then bringing compassion to others. Now, oftentimes you can flip it where you go in and focus on bringing compassion and help and care and support to others first, and then it winds up for yourself. But it has to start first and foremost at the individual level with a genuine concern for other people. You can't, there isn't, you can't, as they say, what do they call that? Eco washing or greenwashing, where organizations come in and they give lip service to being environmentalists. The same thing is true with this. You can't, what I call care wash. You actually have to show up with a genuine concern because these things are coming from one's autonomic nervous system. Ultimately, all of this is very much felt. So when people are genuinely concerned and cared for, their nervous systems figure it out. It's not from the mind, it's from the embodied experience of feeling safe. And that's when the generativity starts to unfold. So when it comes to practical organizational implementation, it depends on the nature of the organization, depends on the size, depends on the leadership, depends on what it is that their value proposition is, if it's nonprofit, for-profit, et cetera. But regardless of all of those things, no matter where someone is in an organization, they can start with themselves and their immediate team members if they're not in a position of authority, and or if they are in a position of leadership, they can start with at least themselves and who they can affect in the sense of implementing different policies and or practices and sorts of really rituals and sorts of agreements and so on. So there's a variety of different ways to what we call creating the container where compassion can then, and care, I should really use that term, but care and flourishing can start to show up.
So when you're working with an organization, would you use some sort of diagnostic to go,
Yes,
and research to go and understand where those
absolutely. We
where the
go in and
compassion is lacking?
absolutely. So we go in and do exactly what you just said. Our particular model has in part the container, which is what we call the behavioral space, and that includes all of the formal written rules. Everything you'd read in an employee handbook, the things that you'd see on the wall with the company's values and missions and so forth. But it also includes all of the unsaid rules that are around particular people's expectations as leaders, what they expect, what the company, how the company operates historically. There's a whole space really of what's acceptable behavior in any given organization. And then relative to that is what we call the invitation. And that is really a recognition that everybody in the organization are sovereign individuals making choices. So the invitation is to say, here's some opportunities if you'd like to upskill yourself and become a better communicator, maybe create personal, better coherence internally for yourself, become more empathetic, whatever those skills are, that what I call brilliance, those skills, there's an invitation for people to participate. And when those invitations are activated, combined with the behavior space, if the behavior space has been designed in a way to support this, there's an emergence that happens of the behaviors ultimately that are desired. And when you combine those two things at scale with what we call the x-axis, which is what the organization is actually doing, what they're building or selling or what have you, the mechanics of making that happen, when those things all come together, we define that as what we call the field. And the field ultimately is measurable, and you can evaluate it, and you can see where it's weak, you can see where it's strong, and you can design it at some level, as much as you're designing for behavioral activities by people making choices. As much as you're able to do that, you can design this field, and it becomes an asset ultimately to the organization. So what Salesforce does for CRM, in the sense of that function in the organization, our platform called Flourishingly and our methodologies from Compassion 2.0, we do the same thing for the human relational space within organizations. So we're trying to stand up something that's continuous and it's not some intervention that comes in where someone does a training and it works for 6 months and then it kind of fizzles out. We're trying to do something different. So to your point, we go in and we do an analysis on what invitations are available, what the behavior space, the container looks like, and ultimately what does the current field resulting in, and where does the organization want to go? What do they want to do to address that?
Sounds fascinating. And are you
And
finding that organizations? So I've done a lot of cultural work with companies over the last 20 years. So I kind of this all makes sense to me. Are you finding companies more or less receptive to this?
yeah, what we're finding is that there are a small group of people, not a small, but a group of people in organizations that just intuitively get it. They
Yeah.
just, again, they just understand it. It's like, this makes sense. And a lot of really good leaders have been aware of this intuitively, not necessarily explicitly, but they've been intuitively understanding this forever, for years, for hundreds of years or what have you. But we are trying to make it measurable and how to say investable in a sense. Now, what's happening is that AI, of course, is the next new variant in the world of VUCA that's coming in. And AI, in my opinion, over the course of many years to come, and I think this is a reasonable thing to say, will commoditize all work that it can. So anything that an AI can do that a human is doing, if an AI can do it equally or better, that will happen. So it becomes a question of saying, it begs the question of saying, well, what does it mean to be human then, working alongside AI? And in my mind, again, it's the humanness is where the parasympathetic nervous system states are in place at scale, and the humans are able to access all of these higher already capabilities: ideation, creativity, complex problem solving, empathy, and so on. So this combined model, combined with our model of our AI supporting the ability to understand what we call the organizational's metabolic rate, which is a whole nother thing that we could talk about another time, but that's part of our analysis. We're really positing and the idea of like, this is what an organization is going to look like in the future. And it makes zero sense to not lean into the neuroscience and all of the various science related work that's been done to understand our neurobiological basis as a human, because it's all there and the scientists are just doing incredible work. So let's lean into that and let's combine that with intention combined with AI to ultimately create organizations for the future. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm not sure I articulated myself well there.
Yeah, and you're working with I think we met through, is it Laura Hamilton? Is that
Laura Greenwood. Yes.
Sorry, Greenwood.
Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry, Laura. Do apologise for that. It's to this Laura Greenwood. So you're helping her with she's got a system that she's created.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we're helping her per se. She's bringing her 30 years of work that she's been doing, which is based on a lot of these principles. It's based on a lot of contemplative science. She has been a contemplative practitioner for 50 years, a very, very serious contemplative practitioner, but she's also been on the organizational development side. I don't remember what her PhD is in, but something along those lines. And she's developed this system that combines all of these things. And she's bringing it to Compassion 2.0, and it's a core part of what it is that we're doing with the building our capacities. And what she's done with this system, just very quickly, is it's brilliant. We call it the high performance manager, although it could really be called the high performance communicator. And at the end of the day, frontline managers, their job is to deal with problems all day long. And what this system does is it creates a construct, what we call it's part of the container. What we're about to talk about is both part of the container and it's also part of the invitation in terms of our model. And what it does in particular is it creates a framework of dialogue between a frontline manager with their direct report, such that they can talk to each other and maintain the sovereignty and dignity of the other person and talk about how to solve the problem that's confronting both of them. Because oftentimes, particularly in Laura's 30 years of work, those two things get conflated. And so a manager will show up and there will be a problem and they'll say, well, why did you do that? Or how could you make that mistake? So instantly, the sympathetic nervous system responds. There's a threat coming in. So they respond with fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And the whole conversation goes off the rails. And the problem doesn't get solved maybe as well as it could. Or the person that is being criticized might actually create more problems in the future because they're upset in some sort of subterfuge. So anyway, so this system allows for people to be seen, they see each other and be able to then keep the problem separate and be able to positively work towards resolution.
Amazing.
It's brilliant. It's really very brilliant what she's done.
Yeah, when I first met Laura, she was telling me about her work, and it just seemed an enormous, valuable resource to be utilised in some way for the greater good, and which she was really keen to do. So I'm pleased that you connected, and thank you, Laura, for introducing me to Carson as well.
Yeah, thank you, Laura.
And I apologise. I think I might have got the name confused with an actress. I'm wondering.
Possibly. Well, that's a compliment then. That's
wonderful. So if for people who are listening to this and thinking, well, I'm an individual, I'm an entrepreneur setting up a small business, and you also talked about actually, it starts with personal compassion. What practices can people utilize personally here to maybe consider care a little bit more, and also through their work lives generate perhaps a little bit more of a return on investment, even if it's improved relationships with the family?
Yeah, it's interesting you say this. So the mission, getting back to the mission of Compassion 2.0 again, is to scale compassion. That's what we want to do. And so we do that by leveraging product developers who are touching many, many lives and organizations that are touching many, many lives. But the concept is to create generative orientation from an extractive based orientation, which many of us are living in. And if we can move that and get people to become a little bit more kind and care, or I should say care-based for themselves and for others, we're hoping that when they go home from work, that they, to your point, they bring that to their families. They're just a little bit, maybe a little less on edge, or they have a little greater presence to their challenges, and they have more skills on how to self-regulate, et cetera. And so that shows up in those relationships, and not just families, of course, but friends. And if they're at the grocery store or wherever they might be, just these micro interactions that really matter, because it creates a different felt sense from people in any kind of relationship. Again, even if one is brief as just paying for groceries, as an example. So that's our goal. That's what we're ultimately trying to do, is to create these generative outward rippling effects through this work. Now, when it comes to individual practices, for instance, this is interesting. There's a lot of discussion now around the concept of flourishing, which I think is incredibly important. But there's been a lot of work that's been done on trying to define flourishing, incredible work done by Harvard and some other folks. We take a different approach on it. Flourishing to us is, first off, it's not a noun, it's a verb. It's not a thing you get, it's a state of being. And the amount of flourishing, if you will, is based on one's resonance to oneself and other. That's our construct. Very simple idea. But there is no singular definition of what that verb state should look like. There are 8 billion versions of flourishing on this planet, depending on your lived experience and your culture and all of the different things that you've had. And one person's definition or way in which they have resonance with themselves is very different from another. Yet at the same time, there is a knowledge or an idea of something called flourishing as a noun, in the sense that we can refer to it and everybody has a sense of what that means. So when it comes to the individuals, I would say there's so many different practices out there. I know people, who are attending church. They might, say deep in their prayer. They might generally get maybe more involved in the community aspects of being giving and being helpful towards others. There are, other contemplative science practices. I mean, there's all kinds of different things that are out there. And so I would just encourage people to either lean into what they're doing and or genuinely go seek something that will help them just simply feel better every single day in every moment of their lives. But that's very uniquely into themselves. Yeah. But at the end of the day, compassion is in all major philosophical and spiritual and religious traditions. And there's a reason for it. And it's because the oxytocin, serotonin, and the other neurobiological elements come into play. We're designed to be in groups. So it's important to remember that no matter how fearful you are, and to engage in helping others, even if it's just a little bit.
Fantastic. Well, on that note, it's been brilliant talking to you today. I really found the whole session really encouraging and positive, and I love this idea of flourishing through care, really, caring more for each other, showing more compassion. There is absolutely too a return on investment of care, so why not? And it's something we have to focus in on individually, around compassion to ourselves, but also compassion with others. So I'd encourage people to take what you can, what you've taken from this conversation, but think about how can you care more for others in your community, for your families, for the people that you meet, and if you've got that responsibility that impacts a lot of people, how can you do that? How can you ripple your care across social media rather than the opposite? What we have to do here is move the world forward positively, and we can each have that impact on others through doing that. So thank you so much, Carson. To find out more about Carson's work, you can go to compassion2.com. That's the right place. Carson.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the place to go.
Yeah, and on next week's show, I have Dan Charlish, and Dan is the founder of Snow Camp and Stop, Breathe, Think, and they help young people. They put on incredible events to develop young people who are going through challenges. They take them out to ski as well in the Alps. Many of these have never been out there before. I think they did about 26 trips or something this year. And they also created a charity called Stop, Breathe, Think, where they're supporting with lots and lots of counselling for young people to help them with their development. So we'll meet Dan Charlish next week. But if you've got any questions or comments, please do reach out to me at hello@chriscooper.co.uk. I'd love to hear from you. and also you can connect with Carson Tooth from compassion2.com. We also, if you go to the Chris Cooper website.co.uk, we always put a blog post on at the bottom of the website on each show, so you can find some of the notes from the conversation with Carson next week that you can utilize, that you can share, which will be great. And we've also just launched a new ebook that I've written called the 10 Elevations to Thrive and Do Good. You can access that from the Chris Cooper site for free. At the moment, it's sitting under the Elevation Collective section. You'll see that, but next week or two, it'll be on from the front page. But that's taking the wisdom from the community that I lead around kind of the mindsets and principles to help you do good in the world. So we're back again with you next week. Once again, huge thank you to Carson Kelly. Do check out compassion2.com, and